Hi, welcome to part 3 of our conversation about Israel's creation stories. And on this one, I want to focus on God's gift of the Sabbath. Again, we've seen how God created everything that exists. We talked about how humanity was created in God's image at the pinnacle or the climax of those 6 days of creation, that God created humanity to be his missional community that reflects God's character to, for, and in the world. But as I mentioned in the very first lecture, Sabbath is the true climax of these creation accounts, and it's vitally important that we recapture something of this. Again, notice the rhythms that, again, manifest themselves in Israel's creation story. Again, we talked about it already, that we have a move from tohu vabohu, from a formless void, or formlessness, or purposelessness, or chaos, or a mess. And that God's story then takes this to being good, and then with the creation of humanity, everything becomes very good as creation is finished. But then God does something remarkable. On the other side of very goodness is the true climax of all this, and this is Sabbath. God rests. And notice the movements that have even manifest themselves up to this point. So we have Sabbath, God resting. I'm going to write that in a little bit so we can see a little bit better. Sabbath, God rests. And the whole rhythm of this entire passage is moving towards this abundant time of rest. Did you notice when you read Genesis 1, even how the days go? Most of us think about our days going from dawn until night. And so things get worse. They're bright in the morning, and then it's dark. So you notice how Genesis does it? It was evening, and then it was morning. It was evening, and then it was morning. So there's always this movement in the way that the Bible understands reality, from something less optimal to something better. You know, if light is better than darkness, good is better than chaos, very good is better than good, Sabbath is better than them all. God is moving things forward missionally towards the abundant life that God invites all of his creation to be part of and participate in. So Sabbath is vital, and imagine how that sounds. Again, one of those bumper stickers you see every once in a while in a car goes, I owe, so off to work we go. What if the purpose of your life wasn't just to work, but the purpose of life was rest? So we have this principle set up: 6 days of work that leads to rest. And that's what Sabbath is. Sabbath is a ceasing of activity, and God models it. So our Creator God, when God imagined the universe, wove into the very fabric of time and creation a seven days, and 1 day of that is rest, and it's the last day, and it's ultimately the purpose that we're moving towards. Chew on that just for a minute. We live in a world where people can essentially work 24/7. We can always do something. Technology has made our lives busier instead of helping us because we lose track of things. Sabbath points to a different way, that even the God of the universe rested, and he's created a world where our life is not just endless cycles of 24/7 work, but it ends in rest. Think about even how we think about the days of the week. How many times do we think of Sunday as the beginning? So we have Sunday, rest, then we work. When in fact, how it's really set up is Sabbath is actually Saturday. So in a sense, Sunday's the first day of the week, and it leads to Sabbath as the end. It's the climax. So God has invited us and to have this period of rest based on God's own example. Let's look at Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 to 3. This is the last paragraph of Israel's initial creation account. It says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude, and on the seventh day God finished the work that he'd done. He rested on the seventh day from all the work he'd done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it," made it holy, "because on it God rested from all the work that he'd done in creation." So imagine God has made this temple. Creation is God's temple. He's created priests and priestesses, men and women, to serve as his hands, feet, and mouthpieces, as his visible representatives on earth. And on that seventh day, all creation comes together for a rest as we ponder and reflect on the Creator. You know the rest of the scriptures, Sabbath is a key principle. In the Ten Commandments, which show up in Exodus chapter 20 and Deuteronomy 5, the Sabbath is the middle command between the initial commandments that essentially tell us to love God, so having no other gods, not making images, not taking God's name in vain, and then the commands that have to do with how we relate to others, honoring parents, not stealing, not committing adultery, so on, and not killing, not making false testimony, not coveting. So those commands, love God, love neighbor, which you could summarize the whole law. And Jesus does that. It's implicit in the Old Testament itself. We'll talk about it more when we talk about the covenant at Sinai. But that love God, love neighbor, the bridge that exists there is the Sabbath command in both of Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5 in those 10 commandments. And Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 11, when it gives that Sabbath command, it makes it clear that it's for all creation. So there's a long list. The Sabbath is the longest commandment, probably because it was the easiest to break. And so it lists all of the categories that come under the covering of Sabbath. And there's all kinds of different animals, servants. Everybody's part of the Sabbath rest. And the rationale for that in Exodus chapter 20 is because God rested on the seventh day. So it's 6 days of work and a rest. That's God's gift. And if you read through Israel's laws, Israel was supposed to rest its fields every seventh year. There was a law about releasing Israelite indentured servants or slaves. After 6 years of service on the seventh year, they were free. And then there's this cosmic reboot in Leviticus 25 called the Year of Jubilee, where after 7 series of 7 years, the Year of Jubilee comes and all debts are released and lands are returned back. And in essentially Israelite society was to get this cosmic reboot and this ultimate participation in Sabbath. When we get to the New Testament, Jesus gets himself in a lot of trouble as he's trying to teach what it means to live out the values of the kingdom. And what does Jesus get in trouble for? Healing on the Sabbath. Because it had become about legalism, not about humanity. And Jesus has that really powerful teaching that Sabbath was made for humanity, not humanity for the Sabbath. The book of Hebrews, it reminds us that there's a Sabbath day rest for God's people. Jesus says, "Come unto me, all who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." So this is one of the real promises of the gospel. And as God is seeking to restore a missional people to himself that can be God's agents of abundance, God's ambassadors, the ones who bless the nations with the good news of the gospel, one of the things that we need to recapture in our own lives is that sense of Sabbath. And I don't mean that in a legalistic way, but in a way that serves as a witness in our busyness, in our 24/7 craziness of our world that's driven always by economic things, that there's a God who has created everything. A God who has everything under control, and a God who is woven into the fabric of creation space for rest in the security of the Creator. Again, I look forward to conversation online with you. If you have any questions, send them my way. I'm Brian Russell, and this is the end of our conversation about creation. I'll see you next time when we move to the fall of humanity.